Hey guys. All right. So that was the thing that happened. Um, I guess highlights include Pence conspicuously not answering the question about the peaceful transfer of power, and about pre-existing conditions. Harris, granted, conspicuously not answering the question about court packing. Although I have to say, just doing a little bit of tawdry horse race. Yes, the fly is obviously the most memorable thing about the whole thing. I don't remember. I don't remember who I'm stealing this from, but really, I think when you take a step back, right, just do the just do the horse race thing. Think, okay, well, what if this moved any votes, and it's not clear, it's a vice presidential debate, so probably didn't move hardly any votes at all. But if it did, of course, there's the question of whether any swing voters are more likely to care about peaceful transfer of power / whether they'll get kicked off their health insurance versus how many justices are traditionally on the Supreme Court. But I have to say, I think that Pence probably lost the debate when he revealed himself as Pestilence, one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. I think that what we learned from Nate Silver's analysis at 538 shows that key suburban swing voters really don't support ravaging the earth with plague and pestilence and a man who walks around with flies buzzing around him. All right, that was dumb. If you have any particular questions you want to ask me, just stick them stick them in super chat. No, he did not eat the fly. So I guess credit where credit is due there. He seemed relatively humanish insofar as he let a fly buzz around him without reacting in any obvious way, be literally on his head. But at least he didn't eat it, right? That probably would have been more striking. Honestly, I think that one 5-word summary of the debate. Let me think about that. Harris sucks. Pence sucks more. That's 5 words. I have to say one thing I was surprised by. Some Ryan Lake, who, by the way, is the guy who drew this cover image on Give Them an Argument. Makes the point that all we can really say with any confidence is that he didn't eat it on camera. I guess that's a little bit like the thing about the physicist, the mathematician, and the engineer who are on a train and they see a purple cow, and the engineer says, "Oh my God, there are purple cows in this area," and the physicist says, "No. All we can say is that there's at least one purple cow," and and the mathematician says, "All we can say is there's at least one half of a purple cow." Not very funny, but is what it made me think of. I think that honestly, just on a really basic level, one of the things that surprised me about it is that it didn't. I saw a lot of people on Twitter saying that the conspicuous failure to honor the time limits was some sort of strategy. There was a pissing contest. There was a power move. And I guess, but I have to say, I kind of don't see it, right? Because I'm not sure what sort of rhetorically effective power move it is to get out a sentence or two while the moderator says, "Your time is up, Senator Harris." Or, "Okay, that's the time limit, Vice President Pence," and then say it another sentence or two, and then having them say it again. I guess you're proving that the moderator can't actually stop you, but you're not actually getting out anything that says, thank you, Mr. Vice President. You're not actually getting anything out that seems like it would have any sort of effect on voters, or that it would sound good, or that it would sound impressive. That's absolutely true. Of course, the networks could have cut the mics. I mean, it's particularly strange that didn't happen at the first presidential debate. Tasing them would definitely, it'd be some kind of statement or another. But look, I think that that all not very funny jokes aside, yeah, I mean, I'm sure the rules don't allow muting, but the point is they should. I think that like the actual substance of what was said in the debate underscores both halves of the kind of dilemma that the left tends to have in these general elections. Andy, who does all the logos for this show, also, by the way, since I mentioned Ryan's cover art earlier, Andy Jandrew World did the cover art for Michael Brooks's Against the Web, so very talented guy. But anyway, he speculates that it was the timer fly. I like that. But I think if you think about the actual substance of it, right? Like, kind of try to take a step back from the theatrics, all of the weird stonewalling, the things that you saw sometimes where the candidate would stonewall throughout the 2 minutes so they didn't have to answer the question that was asked, and then pointlessly go 45 seconds over and fight with the moderator at the end. I think that you saw a lot of stuff in this debate that underlined both of the two halves of the dilemma that the left tends to face with these general elections that pit, corporate centrist Democrats against rabidly right-wing Republicans, right? Whether those are rabidly right-wing Republicans like Trump, where there's a certain degree of truth in advertising that he doesn't pretend not to be a monster particularly, or nice, well-behaved, rabidly right-wing Republicans like Mitt Romney, who aren't going to go on the debate stage and start talking about their dick sizes or anything like Trump did in 2016, but are going to, if he'd been elected, right, Romney would have done tons of the same things that Trump has done since being elected, going from what I was talking to Paul Prescott about in the last episode, which is filling the National Labor Relations Board with rabid union busters and reversing a lot of Obama-era precedents. And every time they reversed one, it was always in favor of management, not in favor of labor, up through appointing justices who want to take away women's right to control their own bodies, up through trying to kick people off Medicaid, right? Most of those things, right? Not everything, not the Muslim ban, probably not some of the extreme escalations of the war that was already taking place under Obama against undocumented immigrants, but most of the terrible things that Trump has done, somebody like Romney would have done too. So it's not just about Trump, right? With Trump, you have these twists, these exciting plot twists that we're getting for 2020, like shoving protesters into unmarked vans in Portland, and refusing to say that he'll peacefully leave power, and floating that little trial balloon, whatever it was, like a month ago on Twitter, about how maybe we just shouldn't have an election at all, right? Those are definitely exciting twists to the basic Republican formula. But I think even when you've got your basic Romney, McCain, Bush kind of Republicans, the dilemma that's faced by the left in these elections is the same. And it's also, by the way, it's not unique to the American left by any means. The particular form it takes electorally is a function of the American electoral system, but the French left faces the same trade-offs, right? If you were a socialist or communist in France, where those are both, well, at least have been, the Socialist Party kind of imploded, but those both have been real political power parties that play a serious role in the process there. You faced decisions in 2017, I want to say, when Macron was elected, and in 2002, I think, when Chirac was reelected, where that are structurally very similar to the decisions faced by the American left in elections like these, right? That in the American case, during the primary phase, you have somebody you'd actually want to vote for, whether a sort of ineffectual version like Dennis Kucinich, or a real serious contender like Bernie Sanders. But then in the general election phase, you're faced with the choice between somebody like Joe Biden or Barack Obama and somebody like Mitt Romney or Donald Trump. And why I say I think that what we saw in the debate really underscored both halves of the dilemma and why it is a dilemma is this, that I think you did see a lot of things that happened that came up in the debate that showed that there are real and consequential differences on issues that matter to us. Most obviously, abortion rights, towards the end when they were talking about the courts, but many other things as well, that there are real things at stake there. The thing that I wish they'd asked a bunch of questions about, but of course they didn't, because this is the corporate media we're talking about, is what I was talking about earlier, the union busting issue, National Labor Relations Board, where actually, if you look at the difference between the Obama precedents and the Trump reversals, there are real serious differences there. And that's the sort of thing that, like I said, if you're a French communist rather than an American DSA member, the specific form of the dilemma is different, but you do get the same basic shape of it, which is that you have somebody during the first phase of the election in France who you actually enthusiastically vote for, and then if you're very lucky, you get to vote for them again in the second phase. But if not, you might be faced with some kind of choice that's not unlike the choices that American leftists face during American general elections, like when the justly hated conservative incumbent Jacques Chirac was running for re-election, and the only two candidates that made it into the primary were him and the outright neo-fascist Jean-Marie Le Pen. And then later with Macron, there was the same basic thing with Jean's daughter, Marie Le Pen. And in that Chirac-Le Pen election, there were famously like leftist graffiti in the streets of Paris saying, "Vote for the crook, not the fascist." And that does seem like the obvious tactical call. And I think a lot of the stuff that we saw on a lot of these issues in the debate does underline that. But we also saw things in the debate that show what the other half of that dilemma is, particularly on the issue of climate change, which is where Harris was the most underwhelming. Instead of saying, yeah, hell yeah, we want to ban fracking, of course we do, and we need to have a Green New Deal because that is the absolute bare minimum of what could actually save us from some of the worst of what's coming. Then instead, it was taken as like a slander. It's like, oh, how dare you say that we want to ban fracking? We don't want to ban fracking, which of course is unfortunately honest. If you go back and look at Obama in 2012, he was bragging about how the U.S. oil and gas production increased so much under his presidency, and so the point of that is that on the one hand, right, there are real things that you saw in the debate that are at stake here. They're both, like I was saying, they're both representatives of the enemy, no doubt about that, right? But they represent different kinds of enemies. That the the way that a neoliberal Democrat like Joe Biden, it's like the same way you have different evolutionary strategies within the same species, right? They're both representing the ruling class, but the way that a neoliberal Democrat like Joe Biden would manage the system on behalf of capital is very different from the way that a right-wing Republican, never mind one as crazy and at least half-heartedly authoritarian as Trump, would manage the system on behalf of capital. And there are real places in terms of courts, in terms of the National Labor Relations Board, in terms of lots of other issues. There are real consequential, no bullshit ways that matters. But the fact that Harris didn't have anything more plausible to say about climate change really shows you the limits of certainly any politics that begins and ends with vote for the lesser evil, which, as something Ralph Nader certainly wasn't wrong about, even if I think that his electoral strategy was ultimately a non-starter, is that the lesser evil is still very, very evil, right? That's still absolutely true. And I think what it really shows is that if you have Biden be elected, which I do think is the most likely thing that's going to happen, right? I was on some podcast over the weekend where they asked me at the end what I thought was going to happen during the election, and of course the real answer would be, how the hell should I know? But I played along, and my answer was two parts, right? One, I think the thing that's most likely to happen is that Biden wins, and that he then takes office, right? Biden wins, and there's no constitutional crisis, anything like that. Biden just becomes president. I think that is the most likely thing that happen. If I had to make a bet, I would bet on that, right? That was the first thing. But then the second thing I said is I would not bet on this subject right now, because we're clearly in uncharted waters, and really seriously, deeply, who the hell knows? But if Biden does win, which, as I said, I very much hope that he does, if he does win, I think that what the climate change part of this especially showed, I think it's a really vivid reminder of why, even though I think the sort of ultra-left, vote for Howie Hawkins in swing states, even though, the maximum that he's possibly going to get is 2% of the vote or something, even though I think that's wrong. I think that the progressives for Biden sort of view, he's not perfect, but, we can pressure him into supporting all these important reforms. I think that's also not true. And I think you saw that, right, from Harris. I think one of the most perceptive comments I saw on Twitter was from Li Feng, who said that you have to keep in mind that both of these people, Harris and Pence, made it onto their respective ticket because, among other things, they're both favorites with the donors. They're both really good at these high-dollar fundraisers and really reassuring the donor class. In Pence's case, by balancing out Trump's craziness, and in Harris's case, by reassuring them, right? That she's got their back. And you could really see that here. So if Biden does win and becomes president, which, by the way, given Biden's age and visible deterioration, quite likely means that Harris would become president, or at the very least, even if Biden does serve out one whole term, that Harris becomes the candidate for 2024. By the way, I'm not, first of all, I think if you live in most states, sure, vote for Howie Hawkins. Why not, right? Why not lodge that protest if you're not in one of the handful of states where your vote might actually matter? And if you are in one of the states where it actually matters, and you're going to vote for him anyway, okay, right? I mean, that would not be my tactical advice, but I'm also not going to sit here scolding or yelling at or shaming anybody who has a different take than I do on that issue, right? I think that's extremely counterproductive. And anyway, that's just not. I refuse to have that be what my role is. So in any case, if Biden is elected, which I hope he is, then I think that what the climate change stuff that you saw tonight really underscores is that that's not a solution, even a partial solution, or, oh, maybe we can like pressure them enough and it'll become a solution. It's just not a solution. Because really, I mean, especially on that issue, right? The difference between climate incrementalism and climate denial is largely aesthetic. So on that issue, right, and not just that issue, of course, right, but I think that's one of the ones where it becomes the most dramatically obvious, right? What's true in general, whether you're talking about healthcare, finally winning Medicare for all, which, my God, should be considered incremental. Like, we're not talking about workers' control of the means of production here. We're not even talking about like some real serious sweeping structural reform to really lessen the authoritarian power of the state. Right? All we're talking about is achieving what Canada has had for decades, right? That should be considered incremental. And even on that, right? Even on that, much less some of this existential stuff about climate change, Biden winning, which again, I hope he will, since I'm voting in a swing state. I will hold my nose and vote for him. But Biden winning is not a solution or a partial solution or something that could be pressured to become a solution. At best, it's hitting the snooze button. Right? It's a defensive maneuver to stop some of the worst of what could happen in the next few years, and one hopes give the left and the workers' movement a chance to get our shit together, right? But that's all it is. And if you're under any illusions whatsoever, right? I mean, that's not nothing. I think that if you think it's going to take, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, right, for the American left to really get its shit together, well, at the end of those 5 years, 10 years, whatever, I'd prefer to still have some public sector unions left standing, for example. And I think that's much more likely to happen with the court appointees and National Labor Relations Board appointees you get from Biden. That would be my tactical case. But again, that's a defensive maneuver. That's stopping some particularly horrendous onslaughts from happening, so we maybe have a chance to regroup if we can actually take it. But that's all it is. Actually moving forward significantly on any of these issues requires not having people like Joe Biden or Kamala Harris be the nominees, right? I mean, it requires having people like Bernie, having the kind of powerful labor movement that would undergird a successful democratic socialist political alternative in the United States, so we can actually start to achieve any kind of social democratic anything, much less anything more radical than that. So I think that's the takeaway on the substance of it. Having said that, I'm happy to answer super chat questions, or I'm happy to just like joke about Biden clearly being, or sorry, a joke about no, Biden's human. He's just senile and a sleazy human. Joke about Pence being the pestilence horseman, surrounded by flies. All right, give me questions. Come on, what do you guys want to talk about? All right. Oh my God. Somebody says Sam Cedar said that if Biden has more popular votes, maybe there won't be a constitutional crisis. I didn't watch the segment. I have to say that that on the face of it, I don't see how that would work. Right. I think that just having a few million more popular votes like Hillary did, I don't see how that would necessarily prevent the constitutional crisis. I think what really matters is not the popular vote difference. I think what's going to matter is whether Biden has a convincing enough lead in the crucial swing states that it can just be called for him on election night, and you don't get that effect where Trump is starting to win, and then the mail-in ballots come in, and as more mail-in ballots come in, Biden starts to win, and then the Republicans can do their 2020 Brooks Brothers riot thing. I think if you want to prevent all of that, it's just Biden winning convincingly enough in places like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. So let's see. So yeah, let's see. Ryan asks if I had to choose which of the four horsemen of the apocalypse I would want to be president. Well, let's see. I think that the red horse is war. I think we've had more than enough of that. The black horse is famine. I'd rather avoid that. Hold on. Well, pestilence would be Pence. I already said that I'd rather avoid that. So I guess that leaves us with the pale horse, which is death. And I suppose if you've seen Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, then at least if that were, I realize the Grim Reaper and death as a horseman of the apocalypse aren't exactly the same thing. But if we assume that the rider of the pale horse would be approximately like the Bill and Ted version of the Grim Reaper, then I guess that would be the one that I'd like to be president. Yes, and I'm also reminded that that death is a four horsemen. For anybody who watched the Highlander TV show way back when, there was a character who I always liked named Mythos, who is this very, 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 very long-lived immortal. He'd been alive for thousands of years, and he was just kind of awesomely cynical in many ways. And apparently during his rambunctious adolescence a few thousand years ago, he was part of this group of men who just terrorized the known world, and was the basis of the Four Horsemen legends, and he was death. So that's also a good reason to go with the Pale Rider, whose name is Death. Yes, Mythos was indeed, I agree with Andy, the best part of Highlander. Why was she so adamant about defending fracking? There might be an electoral calculation there about Pennsylvania, but honestly, I think that's definitely part of the answer, but I think that part of it is just sheer cowardice. In other words, and this really goes back to what I was just saying about how electing Biden-Harris would at best be, it would be hitting the snooze button on certain things, right? But it wouldn't be a solution to almost anything, because if you're kind of living in fear of saying that you want to ban fracking playing badly in Pennsylvania, what that really shows is that you haven't figured out how to sell serious action on climate change in a populist way. That you'd actually need to sell it in order for there to be any chance politically of that happening, right? That, like, in other words, that you don't want to say you'll ban fracking because everybody knows that you're not going to do the Green New Deal thing and create millions and millions of good union jobs, building up a clean energy infrastructure that would be way more than the few jobs that would be lost from banning fracking. And because everybody knows you're not going to do that, that means that you can't afford to say that you can't afford politically to say that you're going to ban fracking, because then too many people in Pennsylvania think they just won't have a job. So I think that's the main answer. I think that I think there might be other issues with donors and things like that, but I think that the main answer is that political answer, which is a really important answer, right? Because, like, this is how the yellow the yellow vests happened in France because anytime you try to say that the action that you're going to get on climate change is going to be on top of the necks of the working class, that you're going to do it in a way that's like just that your pitch is, oh, it's really important in the long term we do this, so the people who can least afford to suffer are just going to have to suffer for it, right? For example, by having a gas tax, that's primarily going to hit working class consumers. That's a political non-starter. Again, I say this in the voice of, like, if you ever watch Archer, when they keep saying that's how you get ants, right? That's how you get yellow vests, right? Is by doing that. The way to actually have a politically effective strategy on climate change is exactly the way that that AOC and Markey and all these people have, to their credit, talked about, which is one, packaging together serious action on climate change with as much social democratic stuff as possible. That's why I think actually that phrase, the Green New Deal, is brilliant politically, because it packages together, it associates serious action on climate change with having something like the New Deal. And in particular, it's not even just a matter of packaging things together, because if you were going to really do a serious rapid transition to greener energy sources, that would, of necessity, involve creating tons of new jobs. And if you're going to do it quickly, right, like not just try to do some neoliberal piddly nonsense with tax incentives, but you are really going to try to do it on the schedule that we need to, that would have to be through direct government action, meaning that those would be good public sector jobs, preferably unionized public sector jobs. And that could actually be like a serious political pitch, right? We are going to phase out fracking, but you're not going to be missing a single damn paycheck, because right now, we're going to hit the ground running with this green jobs program. I think that's the way that you absolutely have to do it. Yeah. Let's see. Andy says, if Pence was to use a transporter, would it be surprising if he didn't start to mutate and try dragging Mother into the transporter with him so they could be fused into one person? If anybody isn't familiar with this little piece of creepy Pence trivia, he refers to his wife as Mother. I'm not going to touch that. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, again, Green New Deal versus Green New Austerity. That's the question. What the Julian Huxley in the chat says Pence would touch that, though. Yeah, of course, Ben Shapiro does not think climate change is an existential crisis, but he is also something of a idiot. If you'll recall, one of Ben Shapiro's greatest hits was doing his Ben Shapiro thing, where he's talking very, 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 very fast, so people don't have time to, and very, very confidently, so nobody's going to question what he's going to say. He said, that, oh, well, even if it's true that there is man-made climate change, I think he was still equivocating on that, or that's not the right word, but he was still ambivalent about that. Yes, he is a fan of DAP, right? DAP. Figure that one out for yourself. But he said, right, this was, I remember Michael did a segment about this last year. I remember watching it, cracked me up. I think it was on the Majority Report, not TMBS, that Ben Shapiro said, oh, don't worry, even if climate change is real, even if this really is happening, and so the sea level rises a little bit, whatever, no big thing, you just sell your seaside property. I am not normally a fan of voting restrictions, but if given a couple of minutes to think about it, you can't see what's wrong with that suggestion. You probably shouldn't be allowed to vote. Let me just check this real quick. So, yeah. Yeah, Ryan says, I'll bet Pence loves faux incest porn, which by the way, completely off topic, but I remember having a conversation about that last year. I think that made me laugh a lot about how there was a porno that was like a Game of Thrones parody porno where they were highlighting the fact that at least in the faux incest porn, at least it's faux, right? They're this is my, step brother, stepsister, right? And Game of Thrones actually went beyond that. But yes, no, that's exactly the point, right? That that Ben Shapiro's big advice was that you should just sell your underwater house. Who exactly is going to buy the underwater house? I mean, even disregarding the fact that the actual effects of changing the sea level and having these global, and the changes of global weather patterns and all of that stuff is actually accelerating stuff like the water shortages that helped to fuel the beginning of the civil war in Syria that created millions of refugees, and that having the combination of making certain parts of the earth uninhabitable. It wouldn't have to be that much of the earth being uninhabitable to really trigger the nightmare scenarios here. The combination of having more of the earth be uninhabitable and thus fueling refugee crises on a scale that we actually haven't ever seen, with the rise of authoritarian right-wing pseudo-populism of the Trump, Bolsonaro, Viktor Orban variety. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to see how that could get absolutely horrifying. Andy says, remember when Ted Cruz tweeted a link to faux incest porn? I do not remember that, but that is hilarious. Yeah, of course, right. When the Republicans say the climate has always changed, I mean, that's obtuse, bordering on, I guess for whatever reason, been doing a lot of goofy pop culture references tonight. But if you watched the Watchmen movie, right, whenever that was there, where Dr. Manhattan says, well, he doesn't understand why death is such a big deal because a dead human body has as many particles in it as a living human body. And that's kind of the level at which the Republicans are at when they say, oh, well, the climate has always changed. So what does it matter? It's like, oh, well, I mean, like, you might as well, God, I mean, imagine if we applied that to all sorts of other things, like if that was their line about the COVID crisis. Oh, well, people have always died. Why are you making a big deal about a couple 100,000 people dying? Death has always existed in the world. So now people are dying at a faster rate of different things, but whatever. Yeah. Yeah, that was a low point in the debate. Pence trying to take cover under the in the H1N1 comparison, which, yeah, I mean, it's obviously, yeah, I think, right, was it 12,469 deaths in the United States from H1N1 compared to well over 200,000 at this point, right? I mean, this is just not, as Samuel L. Jackson put it in his character put it in Pulp Fiction, right? That's not the same ballpark. That's not even the same league. They're not even playing the same sport. Yeah, somebody asks, why do neoliberals try to make economic arguments for not addressing climate change in time? Like, what does the economy matter if the world dies? And of course, that's a way that these two worldviews converge, because honestly, talking to some centrist Democrats defending tepid incrementalist approaches to climate change on the basis of that, anything else, the economy, right, sounds an awful lot like hearing Republicans say, well, it'd be nice to let people stay home with their families and be safe during a plague, but the economy. And if anything, it's actually even more ridiculous in some ways in the climate change case. It's ridiculous in both cases, because you actually can't have an economic turnaround from the post-COVID recession without doing anything about COVID, right? Like if you look at the states, like what level of restrictions still exist in what states, and the comparative numbers about consumer dollars. My understanding is that the states that have lifted restrictions, have lifted more restrictions, haven't really seen the economic benefits from that you might expect them to, which actually makes sense if you think about it for another 30 seconds, because if people are afraid, for example, that if they go out to a restaurant, then they're going to get the plague and die, then they're probably a lot less likely to go out to a restaurant. So I think that you can't really turn around the economic issues without turning around the public health situation. But it's even more ridiculous in the climate change case, because when it comes to climate change, not only is it wrong to say that we can't take serious action on climate change without devastating economic consequences, but actually taking serious action on climate change would massively stimulate the economy, because you would be pouring so much money into the economy and creating all of these new jobs in the process, which should be a very easy argument to make, right? Like I think that the hardest political argument to make is the one that your Obama, Clinton, Biden kinds of Democrats end up having to make, which is, we want to do something about the economy, but we're not going to do anything about like the Green New Deal because we're not crazy. So sorry, we want to do something about climate change, but we're not going to do anything like the Green New Deal, because then you're in a position of saying, for example, you want to shut down the coal mining industry without bringing in anything that would create remotely comparable jobs. Whereas I think that if Bernie had been nominated and he was running on the Green New Deal, I think that would be a vastly easier political sell, because he could talk about all of the new jobs that they're not just going to have to hope would come about as some sort of bank shot, indirect consequence of some policy. But no, it's like, we are going to create these jobs directly. We're going to hire people. Trump, why is it that you don't want, I'm not going to try to do the Bernie Sanders voice. Why is it that you don't want us to hire all these people and to give all these people new, good, unionized public sector jobs? So Gervais in the chat says climate change is too abstract to most people. Like 200,000 Americans died of COVID. Things like ISIS are scarier for some reason, which is why Pence kept mentioning it. Well, yes and no, right? Remember that a lot of what Trump won on the first time, right? I mean, I don't think it's necessarily why he won, but I think it was a factor, is that he went around to places like Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania saying he was going to bring the jobs back, that he was going to create millions of new jobs and bring back these industries. And having a job versus not having a job, or having the kind of industrial job that you could support a family with versus not having it, is not abstract to people at all, right? It's the furthest thing from abstract for voters that could be affected by it. There's a question about retraining in the chat, and I absolutely am going to get to that, right? But I do want to just finish this thought first, right? So I think that climate change per se can be very abstract, but I think that, hey, we're going to create this jobs program to transition to green energy, and we're going to create, and we're going to have to hire X many people to do it. That's not at all abstract, right? That's extremely concrete. So this goes back to what I'm saying about, I think it depends how you pitch the issue. There's a way of talking about climate change that's extremely abstract, but there's definitely a way of talking about it that's extremely not abstract. So I did want to do I mean, sure, it would be nice if people were directly motivated by it, but I think you just have to live. I think you just have to operate within the existing realities. Like a very smart German guy said in the 19th century, men make their own history, but they don't make it under conditions of their own choosing. Yeah, and of course, it is true that people don't like changing jobs and fields. That's why retraining often doesn't work. I don't think it's exactly that retraining doesn't work. I think the problem is with what exactly the retraining is supposed to do in any case. And of course, right? Yes, absolutely. Given the option, like, right, probably most people in any given field would rather be able to stay within that field rather than be retrained and switch to doing something else, right? Which is a totally understandable. Anthony in the chat says the fly won the debate. I like that. Yeah, which is a totally understandable human impulse, but that's not the main thing that's wrong with the neoliberal learn to code nonsense. So I think it's worth kind of separating out the issues, right? That the problem with telling people to learn to code is that just because a lot more people learn to code, that's not going to magically create a bunch of new coding jobs. What it will do is devalue knowing how to code in the labor market, right? So in other words, you're not going to actually get more people with jobs as coders just because more people have learned how to code. Maybe you will a little bit, right? But then the supply of labor and the demand for it, will, it's not like there's just bottomless demand. So you're not going to create new demand to hire coders by training a bunch of new people to code. What you are going to do is drag down wages for coders because now you have a bunch more people who need a job who can do the job. That's the problem with telling people to learn how to code. And this gets back to the point about retraining. And if the point of the retraining program is like, oh, hey, we're going to, like the kind of thing you did actually see quite a bit of, I think, in the Obama administration, that, oh, we're going to, give you a job center and there are various training programs you can sign up for. And then you just kind of hope that whatever you take the training program in, you can get a job in later. I think people have learned at this point that not to trust that, right? That's not... that's just not a good long-term gamut, right? Whereas if instead of that, right, it's not like, oh, we'll give you the education and then hope you can do something with it, or do the real like peak liberal things where it's like, oh, we'll give you a tax credit to help you get the education and then hope you can do something for it. Instead of that, if the point of the is instead, hey, we are directly giving you this new job, then Andy says we saw this with pharmacists in the Bush administration. And Sean says programmers I know hate boot camps because they flood the field and drive down average salaries. Exactly, right? That's the point. But if the point if instead of saying here's the hey, here's a training course you can enroll in, and then when you get out of it you'll be competing for the same 12 jobs with 22-year-olds who just got out of college, then a middle-aged person who's like losing his job, coal miner or fracking, is going to treat that with understandable skepticism. But if instead of that we say, no, the government will directly hire you to do this other thing, that's much more attractive. Now, it still involves some dislocation because you're still switching jobs, but actually the jobs, in some cases could be better. The jobs could be ones where, like with fracking, for example, this is one of the reasons why I've always thought that worker-owned firms would have different incentives on this than traditional capitalist enterprises, because when you come to certain kinds of environmentally damaging practices like fracking that aren't just environmentally damaging in this sort of more abstract way that affects the whole world, but that are environmentally damaging in this immediate way. You can see that they mess up the water supply, for the drinking water in your community that you actually live in. If you're a worker who lives in that community, your incentives are different than a shareholder who doesn't necessarily live in the community, or a CEO who doesn't necessarily live in the community. And so I think that when it comes when it comes to this, right, I think that actually oftentimes, even financially, and certainly in terms of safety, certainly in terms of effect on the community, I think some of this stuff can actually be pitched as more attractive than some of the jobs that are lost. And also remember that many more jobs would be gained than they would be lost. That there is, because if you think about this, right, like my mother grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. I visited there a bunch growing up. That's where my grandparents lived until they died. And Youngstown, Ohio, a few decades ago, looked like something out of a dystopian movie, right? Like it was. I remember, my grandmother worked as a nurse, and I remember a story about somebody coming in, who was from out of town, who was just like, I think, riding through on his motorcycle, and he got into an accident. And the nurses, it was like the first guy they'd seen there who had pink lungs, instead of black, because the industrial pollution that was just belched into that city nonstop every day was so. Was like, it was like this layer of grime over everything all the time. So when Trump goes to Youngstown and he lies, or he went to Youngstown in 2016, I remember, and Lordstown, some of those other places, and lied and said, "I'm going to bring the jobs back." Why were people happy about that? Was it because they really wanted the city full of black lungs back, the grime back, the noisy, miserable, dangerous working conditions that you often had in steel mills? That you have in all sorts of industrial jobs. It's not that the jobs are actually better in terms of what work is being done under what circumstances with what effects in the community. It's that you want the industrial job back. One, because in many cases you're just unemployed, right? So you'd rather have that job than no job. But two, because those were jobs that you could actually support your family on. Why? Well, and this was always the big con, right? Because even if Trump had done something that would have brought those jobs back, they wouldn't, whatever companies came back, it wouldn't be like the steel companies that had already been unionized back in the 1930s, because it wasn't a good job because it's innately a better job to work at a factory than a grocery store. The reason it's a better job to work at a factory than a grocery store is because the powerful industrial union guaranteeing you a middle class income and benefits. But there's absolutely no reason in principle why we couldn't design an economy where people could have that lifestyle working at a grocery store. And at that point, there's really no intrinsic reason to prefer one to the other. I know when we started this, I don't know. I really thought this was going to be joking about the fly on Pence's head. This went to some much more depressing places. But give me some super chats, ask me some questions. Let's see if we can direct this to other subjects. Suppose somebody says in the chat, the government announced instead of Medicare for all, They were just going to use taxpayer money to build a load of government-owned hospitals that would treat people for free and compete with private hospitals. How do you feel about that? Well, I'd like some parts of that, but not others. There's also a question about how big a problem I think Twitter tankies are for creating socialists. I will answer that too, but let me answer the first part. All right. Sorry, something else in the chat is cracking me up, but I'm going to focus on the those two questions. So what I would like about it is the government-owned hospitals. I think that's fantastic. In fact, I think that should be the long-term goal. I think that we should be talking. I think the reason it strategically makes sense to focus on Medicare for all right now is because Medicare for all, in other words, nationalizing the insurance industry, having a state monopoly on insurance, would be a massive step in the right direction. And it's something that already has broad public support. So I think in terms of the sweet spot between what we want, not some ridiculous neoliberal Rube Goldberg nonsense like Obamacare, but something that's actually a robustly social democratic solution like nationalizing insurance. And what there's that sort of constituency for right now, it makes total sense to focus on Medicare for all. But I talked about this in my Overton window article for Jacobin, also in a couple of other places, that can't be, or it certainly shouldn't be, the end game, right? Because if we privatize, if we nationalize the insurance industry, but we leave the hospitals in private hands, we've solved a lot of the pathologies of the for-profit healthcare industry. But we haven't solved all of them, and I think we should. And we've still got an element of profit in the system. We should take it out. Toy Tanks, thank you so much for the super chat. I will read it anyway. Says no question, some super chat. So much appreciated. Yeah, no, I love clips of Michael laughing. Both make me very sad and also very happy at the same time. But yeah, look. So as far as the suggestion that was made about the publicly owned hospitals compete with the private hospitals, I like the public ownership of hospitals, half of that. What I don't like is the two-tier healthcare, half of it. And this is something that came up a lot in the primary when not in the context of nationalized hospitals, but in the context of a public option for health insurance. That this is why I think actually that we shouldn't be afraid as socialists of the word monopoly. That private monopolies are very bad, but public monopolies can be great, right? Public monopolies in many cases are a big improvement over having choices. YT Party Tonight, thank you so much for the super chat. Says, I have no question at the moment. I just want to thank you for this thoughtful chat. Much appreciated. Thank you for thank you for showing up, right? And thank you for the super chat. So I think that public monopolies are actually often a good thing. That it's often a good thing to have some publicly owned entity that exercises a monopoly, which might be counterintuitive, but I think there are good reasons to think that that's so, right? So first of all, if you actually think about some examples, like Finland, which even many of the right-wing, creepy ed reform crowd that Freddie DeBoer rightly skewers in his excellent book, The Cult of Smart, a lot of those people actually, if you go back, you watch that awful movie, Waiting for Superman, a lot of those people actually really, they really hold up the Finnish education system and say, oh, see, we need charter schools so we can be more like Finland. Total nonsense. Because Finnish teachers have very strong unions, whereas the ed reform crowd is always bashing teachers' unions. But two, because in Finland they actually don't legally allow private schools. Right? All schools in Finland are public schools, and they have the best education system in the world. I mean, that's one data point out of many, right? By itself, that doesn't prove anything. But I think that there are, wouldn't a national insurance system force private hospitals to come to the table? Sure. I think that if you have a single payer system, right, which is what you get with nationalizing the entire insurance industry, in other words, Medicare for all, we have that, there are lots of countries. Look, America has both government-run hospitals and privately run hospitals. The hospital that Donald Trump just came home from was a government-run hospital in America, mostly for veterans, but that's it, right? So David Ledger Jeffrey, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thank you so much for the super chat. Says thank you for what you do, Ben. The fly is prophecy. HS Ross, thank you so much for the super chat, brother. Says what's wrong with public health insurance and non-public but worker co-op hospitals, health providers? Couldn't that also be done with couldn't the two tiers? Maybe, right? So first, let's talk about the problem with having just a public option within capitalism, right? Within what we've got right now, and why that I think, at least if we assume that broader context, right? Whatever you think about what would be better in some socialist but not totally marketless socialist future, what should we say about the idea of just having a public option rather than a completely nationalized insurance industry? And I think the danger of it, right? The reason why that does get us two tiers of care right now, I think you can see if you look at Medicaid, right? Which in many ways is great, right? There was a while, a few years ago, right? There was a minute when my wife and I were on Medicaid, in between jobs, and in some ways it was the least annoying insurance provider ever. Joshua Bauman, hey, that's my that was my Youngstown grandparents' last name, Bauman. Joshua Bauman, thank you for the super chat. Really appreciate it, brother. Says, love all the left independent media comrades creating amazing content to help educate and inspire the rest of us. Your content is always insightful. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and really appreciate the super chat. Cody Hamilton, thank you so much for the super chat. Says, views on FOSS, free and open source software, and the left using it to organize instead of proprietary software. And there's a link that you can see in the super chat. Maybe we'll put the link in the description here. I will absolutely answer that, but first, just to finish up the thought about two-tier health insurance and Medicaid, right? In lots of ways, Medicaid is great. The problem is, or one problem is, that a lot of doctors and clinics right now won't take it. Right, the reason they won't take it is because the private insurance companies can pay out at a higher rate, so it's in their interests not to take it. So you have doctors you can see if you're a poor person on Medicaid, and you have doctors that you can see if you have employer-provided health insurance, and doctors you can probably only see if you have extraordinarily good health insurance, or you're just flat out rich. And so that those differences can really make a difference of life and death. That seems obscene, right? That would be like if you think about services like police and the fire department, right? Like if you say, okay, well, there are cops that will help you with that robbery report, or will come to stop the armed robbery or whatever, if you have special police insurance. And if you don't, then you'll get some, but they're not going to be the ace ones, right? I mean, there's something really seriously morally objectionable about that, in my view, and we can do better. I think it is better to have uniformly public services. So would it be bad if we had some sort of, actually, the more I think about it, I'm not crazy when we talk about the kind of socialist society, the kind of stage of socialism where maybe you've abolished the distinction between the working, you no longer have um, a class of external owners of the means of production, right? Workers own the means of production, which, God, let's not talk about that like it's nothing. That would be a historic stride forward of almost unbelievable proportions. It would be the first society that's existed since the Neolithic Revolution without a subservient labor force and a dominant ruling class. But the point is just that if you had some sort of market socialist society, or really, I don't like the phrase market socialism because I think it puts the emphasis in the wrong place, right? I guess the clunkier but more accurate thing to say, because presumably anybody I'm familiar with, any writer I know about who advocates so-called market socialism also wants a greatly expanded public sector. So there would also be lots more planning than there is going on right now. So I think maybe like, mixed economy socialism or something like that would be a more accurate way of putting it. But if you had a society where you had some private but worker-owned firms and you also had a greatly expanded public sector and you completely expropriated the capitalist class, under those circumstances, would it be a bad thing to have some cooperative private hospitals or maybe even cooperative private insurance companies? And I guess I won't claim to have thought a lot about it, but my instinct is to say that it would still be better, even under those circumstances, to have a public monopoly, because I think those are really services you want to be decommodified, right? You want to just take that whole area of life outside of the market. And I think that even if you couldn't get rid of markets across the board, and again, or you couldn't for the moment, maybe in the future technology will get good enough that the calculation and coordination functions served by markets in our society could just be served by algorithms. I don't think we're there yet, but I think we could get there. But even if you weren't there yet, right? Even if you did have some markets, I think one of the real advantages of having a society without a capitalist class would precisely be that under capitalism, markets tend to colonize every aspect of life, and without a political process distorted by the political power of your Waltons and Jeff Bezoses, and in general, the political power of a capitalist class, you could make collective democratic decisions about, okay, what are the areas of society where we're willing to live with markets in exchange for increased efficiency, for solving certain sorts of calculation problems, and what are the areas of life that we want to insulate from markets, because there are some really destructive features of markets, even when we're talking about competing worker-owned firms. Never mind when we're talking about blood-sucking capitalist corporations. So yeah, absolutely, right? McMindfulness, Who Moved My Cheese, points out the population of the United States is roughly 320 million. DSA has a membership of about 100,000. Let's be generous and say that there are about 1 million non-aligned socialists, right? So we're talking about still less than 1/3 of 1% of the population who are actually socialists. Of course, thank God you have a vastly larger percentage of the population who are at least friendly to some serious social democratic reforms, which is a good starting point. But as far as any sort of socialist program that goes beyond that, it is a tiny, tiny percentage. What's a good example of an industry that shouldn't be government run yet? Well, I think some of the greatest failures of state planning in the 20th century were in agriculture. In fact, if you read my friend Lee Phillips and, saying not my friend makes it sound like I don't like him. I just don't know him. Mikhail Rozworski's book, People's Republic of Walmart, in the last chapter of that, they give agriculture as an example of a sector that might be particularly hard to take out of the market and decommodify, or at least we should be particularly cautious about, given that some of the most horrific failures of 20th century central planning involved agriculture. So that's an obvious example. In general, I think consumer goods or where we should be the most circumspect about it. I think you can have. I think you can have, like, for example, an article that I'm working on or meaning to work on. I haven't really had much time to work on for Jacobin. Is probably just going to be called snappy two-word title: nationalize Walmart. And I think that I think we should nationalize Walmart, for example. Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that we'd have a public monopoly on grocery stores. It would just mean we'd have a public option for grocery stores. I think that when it comes to a variety of different consumer goods markets, it's a bad idea. Well, not that, again, it's not that you necessarily couldn't long term, but I think that completely taking that stuff out of the market right now is really what's going to most obviously trigger those calculation worries, which I know some leftists don't like it when you raise this because they're used to hearing it from their political enemies. But just because your political enemies make an argument, that doesn't mean there's nothing to it. I don't think it's an insoluble objection to any sort of socialism. Obviously, I'm a socialist, but it is a real issue. And so that issue about coordinating production with consumer preferences, which might seem like a small thing when we're just sort of sitting around having an ideological discussion, but Soviet citizens certainly didn't think it was a small thing. I mean, this is a big part of the reason, along with the political authoritarianism, of course, but it's a big part of the reason why capitalism can be restored in all of those countries without the working class doing anything to defend the system, that was supposed to be on their behalf, right? Because they were so alienated from it and so frustrated by this very thing, right? Their disenfranchisement qua consumers. So let's see. Oh yeah, free open source software. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a good thing. I'm not totally sure. I don't want to neglect that question, especially because it was in a super chat. While we're talking about market incentives, but no, in all seriousness, right? I appreciate the support, and we and yeah, I mean, look, sure, I'm all in favor of using such software. I think the broader political issue is probably one about intellectual property laws, and I think, and I'm reluctant to go as far as total abolitionism about IP, certainly under capitalism, because that means that journalists, for example, and artists and musicians don't have like that. I think that people in those fields have a right to make an income. And I think the same would be true even under the kind of socialism it's most easy to imagine being feasible in the near future, right? If we get to the fully automated luxury communism, obviously we don't need IP laws. But if we weren't all the way there yet, then I think it does still, again, I think you need some sort of funding model that provides a good income to people like journalists and musicians and writers and artists. But of course, the kind of intellectual property regimes that we have right now are absurd and draconian and like really ridiculous in terms of stuff like not allowing people to fix and upgrade their own products that they bought and they own, much less the sort of Napster Wars issues from a while back about like giant corporations suing into poverty like random 19-year-olds for downloading music. That's obviously obscene. And this is, again, an area where I think even in a socialist society where we still had some markets, I think if we had a political process that wasn't distorted by the influence of these giant corporations, we'd be much more likely to find a reasonable balance on the IP issue. What are Gloomy Cleric? Thank you so much for the super chat. Says, who are your top 5 to put on the philosopher ship? The philosopher ships to Antarctica. So when he's referring there, to the philosopher ships, these are the steamboats for that transported intellectuals who were expelled from, well, it wasn't the Soviet Union yet technically, but Soviet Russia, in 1922, and so all right, I'm definitely going to answer that as a there's a and I should also read before I do this. HS Ross, thank you so much for this super chat. Really appreciate it. He says, here in Canada, I think 2 tiers come from private insurance covering things that, e.g., dental, the public doesn't. I think the NDP proposal to expand public insurance to cover all needs would largely fix it. Yeah, agreed on both counts. Although I would point out that in the Canadian system, even though lots of Canadians do have supplemental insurance for things as the comrade says about dentistry, for example, right? Things that the main Canadian Medicare doesn't cover, right? So in that sense, you have 2 tiers. There's some people who have things covered that other people don't. But when it comes to basic health insurance coverage, there is still a monopoly in Canada, right? It's illegal to, as I understand it, right? It's against Canadian law to try to sell for profit basic health insurance that would be duplicative of what Canadian Medicare does, as it damn well should be. And yeah, I think was it Jagmeet Singh, the NDP's proposal to expand it to things like dentistry is a very good one. And there too, once it's been expanded, I think that should be a public monopoly, and you shouldn't be allowed to have private companies that are profiting off of selling things that duplicate that. Of course, if even under the NDP proposal, there's still things that aren't covered by Canadian Medicare, then you shouldn't outlaw supplemental insurance, because that would mean people can't have that covered at all, and that would be even worse. But ideally, you should try to cover it so much that there would just be nothing left for supplemental insurance to do. Give me just a second to answer this message. Now I'll be back. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Oh yeah. The top 5 people I would put on philosopher ships to Antarctica. Of course, I wouldn't actually. I have. There was an ACLU membership card in my wallet before there was long before there was a DSA one. Yeah, HS Ross, thank you so much for the super chat. Says, oh yes, in Canada, public insurance has monopoly on what it covers, and I fully agree. We need a public monopoly on health insurance. Yeah, absolutely. Sure, if Martin Heidegger was still alive, could put him on the philosopher ships. The actually McMindfulness, who moved my cheese, has been very generous. He says Martin Heidegger was at least Nazi adjacent. He was more than adjacent. He was literally a member of the Nazi Party, and he made lots of statements praising Hitler. It's at least to the credit of analytic philosophy that we don't have any Heideggers. In fact, all of the philosophers in the Vienna Circle were either killed by the Nazis or fled. Granted, the one thing that complicates that is if Frege had lived long enough, he might have disgraced analytic philosophy in exactly the same way that Heidegger disgraced continental philosophy. HS Ross, thank you for the super chat. Says, I just don't see why we can't have private worker co-ops providing care and building the public insurance. Yeah, I would be less against that than I would be against having insurance cooperatives. I would be less against hospital cooperatives than I would be against insurance cooperatives. I'd have to think about the hospital cooperatives. the question is whether they would still have some of the bad incentives that regular private hospitals do. But I agree that sounds a lot better than having any form of private insurance. Yeah. Okay. So of course, so I guess I should ask for some clarification. Was the philosophership's question about historical philosophers, most of whom are dead, or was it about people who exist in the contemporary United States? The way I interpreted Gloomy Cleric Super Chat was about people who exist in the contemporary United States. Did Ayn Rand understand Aristotle's work at all? That one's real simple. No. As far as people who exist in the contemporary United States, I don't know off the top of my head. David Froome, because he wasn't because I find it despicable that he still managed to be in public life and accepted by liberals despite his role in propagandizing for the Iraq War. That, not to put too fine a point on it, there was at least one journalist who was hanged at Nuremberg for less than that in terms of his direct role. There was, not that I'm saying David Froome should be hung or even really exiled, but I would like him to be symbolically exiled and shunned from polite society because of his role in the run-up to the Iraq War. Even if he doesn't actually have to be literally deported back to Canada from whence he came. Henry Kissinger, obviously, it's, actually, despite the fact that Hitchens disgraced himself in the same way in the run-up to the Iraq War, although at least he wasn't literally a White House employee there, I still think anybody who's read Christopher Hitchens' excellent book on Henry Kissinger feels the injustice, the fact that Hitchens has been dead for 10 years and Kissinger is still alive. If there's one grave I'd be severely tempted to piss on, it will be Kissinger someday. So yeah, Kissinger from, let's see, I would deport him into the Atlantic, somebody says in chat. I would, I think that if we're doing pundits, I think the Meghan McArdle and Meghan McCain would both be good philosophership candidates. And then yeah, I mean, Paul Wolfowitz is a good answer. I mean, obviously anybody like that would kind of deserve it in some sense. So I think maybe Colin Powell. I think maybe the people that piss me off most aren't the people like Paul Wolfowitz, who are like, I think most people in a word association test would be, oh yeah, Paul Wolfowitz, Iraq. Whereas Colin Powell somehow has survived with his reputation intact, and that bothers me much more. Yes, if you were going to deporting Kissinger to Vietnam, if you were going to deport him anywhere, that would be the place to do it, or Cambodia, or Chile, or Kurdistan. Any of those places, I think would, yes, lots of reasons for David Froome. I think any of those places would make sense to me. Oh yeah, I did want to go back to McMindfulness, who moved my cheese point about how like real socialists are like 1/3 of 1% of the population of the United States. The reason that's an important thing to. Oh, sorry. I thought no. I did answer the Ayn Rand question. The question was, did Ayn Rand completely misunderstand Aristotle? The answer is yes. Sorry, Chris the Nobody. I don't care if you don't mention me. So there, I did anyway. Yeah, look, I mean, obviously, all joking aside, I don't think we should exile people who are just pundits. Although, like I said, I think some of them deserve to be informally exiled from public life. But Kissinger should really seriously be like put on trial for war crimes. And in fact, I think Kissinger should spend his remaining years being shipped from country to country, standing trial for the crimes that he's committed in each country under glass, like Eichmann in Jerusalem. But yeah, I think the reason that point about how, yeah, a nation of 320 million people, you have maybe 100,000 DSA members, and sure, maybe you have more people who share the same ideological affinities who aren't members, but still a tiny minority of the population. I think the reason that that's such an important point to emphasize, to just kind of keep things real, has to do with a point that Matt Christman often makes, which is that oftentimes we on the left do the political equivalent of making ships in bottles, taking them to the shipyard, and then being surprised that making a ship in a bottle doesn't actually make you any better at building a ship, or that, like, you can't actually you can't actually go on a seafaring voyage in a ship in a bottle. And I think the point that Matt is making with that metaphor is that we spend so much time talking to each other and kind of agreeing among each other about all these in-group taboos and what takes you have to have so that you don't get accused of being a liberal or whatever. And then we go out into the world, and it makes it very hard to you can't do anything with that, right? Because good luck going out into the world and telling people that they're violating your in-group taboos, because they're not going to give a shit, because they were never part of the process of agreeing on those in-group rules and boundaries and taboos in the first place. And so I think that often, as a tiny minority of the population, we decide amongst ourselves that there are all of these slogans you have to agree to, for example, to really count as a member of the tribe in good standing. And then oftentimes, because people agree to them because they're worried about, being in the fold or out of the fold, and then good luck getting majority support for them. And this also goes back to some of what I was talking about in the Overton window article, and it's it also comes up earlier today. So at 1:00 Eastern Standard Time where I am, but 7:00 Polish time, there's this music festival in Poland, Unsound, that also does panels, some of which are political. And I was on a panel with Lou Drago and Richard Kennedy and Natalie Wynn, ContraPoints, and you can watch that on YouTube. And this kind of came up, this sort of question of trying to appeal to people who currently disagree with you versus rejecting them as enemies. And this point about how it's like 1/3 of 1% that we've got so far on board with the full program really goes to why it's so dangerous to reject people as enemies for not being persuaded yet. I'm not talking about Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos can't be persuaded. He has to be defeated. I'm talking about the great mass of people whose economic interests should line them up with the political program of the left, but who in many cases disagree. Remember that poll over the summer where there was like 50-something percentage of the population that supported sending troops into the cities to shoot rioters. We better hope that a lot of those people are persuadable, or the chances of achieving socialism, which can only come through a movement of the overwhelming majority of the population, are nil. So again, I think it's an important reality check. Yes, H.S. Ross, thank you so much for the super chat. He says, thank you so much for the awesome job you're doing with the show. I can't believe we lost Michael so young and how much we lost with him. He was like the Frank Ramsey of left political commentary. Yeah, for sure. That is not that long after he died, I went back and watched that Lafayette College lecture that he did, and as well as just missing the shit out of him as a human being and as a frequent collaborator in any number of areas. I did the segment on his show, and we co-write articles and other things. So beyond the enormity of the human loss, that really. I think he was a one-of-a-kind talent as a political communicator, and the left, and just doesn't have people like that. and the way he was able, even just watching him interact with those college students at Lafayette, and getting some kind of annoying college Democrat answers, and it'd be very easy for him to just sort of posture and put them down. But the way that he was explaining things to them, and really you could tell that he was like, he was very charismatic and funny because he was Michael. He always was, and the way that he was, you could tell it was important to him that he not just score points with people who already liked him by putting them down, but that he answer their questions in a way that intersected with their worldview and really make them think, is just it's so goddamn impressive. And I just worry that we have so few people who can do that, right? But yeah, somebody said the chat, material reality and dehumanizing alienation should mean a massive U.S. left. What WTF is going on? And I think this is why we have to think strategically about how to appeal to people. And I think the good news is that even though radical socialists are a very small percentage of the population, people who would be amenable to like the Bernie program, social democracy, are a massive percentage of the population. Amenable to, not married to. I think we need to be real about that distinction, but friendly to a lot of those proposals. And so I think we do have very good chances in the short term of building a mass social democratic left, at least. And then I think we need to think about how to build a version of social democracy where when we get to that decision point, like Sweden got to in the 70s, when you've pretty much pushed social democracy to its limits of what the system will accept, what you can do under capitalism, and you have to either retreat, right? Because if the capitalist class still has their economic power, they'll always find ways to translate that into political power, or you have to go forward into some form of socialism. As Michael used to say, right? You have at a certain point you have to take some pieces off the board by democratizing the economy. That when we get to the limits of social democracy, we're at that kind of decision point, then I think we have a much better chance of convincing a majority of the population, if only for the sake of safeguarding the gains that have already been won, to start taking pieces off the table. And I think that has to be the strategy. I mean, if there's another way, I just don't see it right now. I know there was another question that I just didn't. There were a few questions about Twitter tankies earlier. I think it's a problem. I won't say how much of a problem it is because I think it's so marginal that I'm not sure how much that's dragging us down. It's certainly not helping. But I think that like big picture, like Bernie Sanders would not have won 22 states in 2016 and come heartbreakingly close to getting the nomination in 2020, calling himself a socialist, if the Soviet Union still existed, if the Cold War was still going on. That wouldn't have happened, because the realities of that kind of economically sclerotic and politically authoritarian system were the most effective anti-communist propaganda that reactionaries could ever hope for. They also lied a lot about it and exaggerated, but the reality was bad enough, and the lies were more effective because there was a big element of truth to them. And I think as that system, right, the Soviet model retreats into the historical rearview mirror, we do have new possibilities for talking about a better form of socialism. But then I think under those circumstances, when finally you have a much bigger chunk of the pop, you have more people who are open, even if a lot of people are confused about what socialism means, right? That the word doesn't scare them anymore. They're open to radical alternatives to capitalism. I think under those circumstances, say, no, actually, we do want what they had in East Germany or Bulgaria or whatever. That was awesome. Is just about the most politically counterproductive thing you could possibly do. I think that you can sell socialism as an expansion of freedom and democracy. That look at all the you're giving people more control over their lives because you'd have democracy in the workplace. But I think if you're telling people, oh, for the sake of socialism, you might have to give up the democracy and liberties that you already have, I mean, good luck with that, right, is all I can say. Oh, let's see. Nazis got pushed underground hardcore, helped make a comeback. Actually, I heard something kind of funny about that today. I was listening to the Know Your Enemy podcast, which is like a lefty socialist podcast about conservatism and the history of conservatism. I guess the name's pretty obvious. And so I've been listening. I listened to some of it a while back, but I've been listening to more of it because I'm going to be interviewing the Matthew Sitman, who's the co-host of that podcast. Sorry, guys, just give me 1 second. Yeah, so going to be interviewing Matthew Sitman, who's the co-host of that podcast. So to prepare for that, I went back and I've been listening to more episodes of it. I'm not going to try to listen to every episode, but I want to get some of the highlights. And in one of the episodes I was listening to, they were talking about this moment in 1992 when you had this like real resurgence of kind of proto-Trumpian right-wing pseudo-populism with figures like Pat Buchanan. They were talking about David Duke's role in that history, and they said something kind of funny, but I guess accurate, which is that David Duke before that, right? By the time the 90s roll around, Duke tried to make himself more mainstream. He was running for high office in Louisiana, but I think that. But they were talking about his previous history with the Klan, and they said that David Duke accomplished, like, one of his political accomplishments was bringing the Klan and the Nazis together. He was Nazifying the Klan, which again is just kind of a funny sentence to say. But I guess the KKK before Duke, his tenure as leader, the KKK was actually kind of hostile to Nazis because a lot of those guys were World War II veterans that fought Nazis. So that was one of David Duke's big feats of political unity is getting the Klan to unite with the Nazis. HS Ross, thank you so much for the super chat. He says, I love things like the new Gravel Institute initiative. But how can we overcome the right-wing misinformation machine? I feel like the social media game is stacked in their favor. Yeah, thank you for that. It is stacked in their favor for sure, right? And I don't have some magic bullet solution to how we can overcome that, but I think the Gravel Institute is a great initiative. I like they got it, as a fan of Archer and Bob's Burgers, I like they got H. John Benjamin for that announcement video. And I think I'm going to be doing some stuff with them coming up, so stay tuned for that. But look, I mean, there's a reason that, I'm doing stuff for Jacobin all the time. And, there's, I think building up a robust left-wing media is definitely part of the answer. It's obviously not the whole answer, but it's got to be a big part of it, right? I mean, how do we actually win the information game against these people? I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I have some amazing solution to that, but it does underscore why it's important to try to counter them whenever and wherever it is at all possible. Mitch Clark says we need to find some self-loathing billionaires. I guess probably, I don't know, maybe people who didn't know they were related to a billionaire and they inherited the money and they just got it, right? So they haven't shifted their mindset yet. But no, look, I think crowd-funded initiatives, are the only game in town up until such point where we've rebuilt the labor movement and we have we have unions that are militantly political, so they'll fund these things. I think crowdfunding is pretty much the only game in town. Some version of, again, I don't claim to have some great answer here that we don't already know, but all the funding techniques the left is using right now. Can you tell us more about what you're up to in the future? I will, and then this will maybe be the last thing. We'll cut it for tonight. Because it is almost 12:30, and I want to play Rummikub with my wife and walk the dog, and whatever. I'm an old man. I got to get to sleep in not very many hours. Yeah, what I'm up to in the future, right? So yeah, look, I think I've mentioned before on these streams, I'm co-writing a book with Bhaskar Sunkara and Mike Beggs, who's an Australian economist. That I think the working title, we're still polishing the proposal right now. Real good chance it might go to Verso. We'll see. The working title is The Blueprint: What Socialism Could Look Like in the Real World. And I'm also working on a solo book about Christopher Hitchens, which that one's for Zero, and we're hoping that comes out in time for the 10-year anniversary of his death, kind of trying to rehabilitate Hitchens as his 4 decades as a left-wing polemicist before he went bad at the end. There's so much good stuff there that whole body of work. Really want to try to introduce a generation of leftists who never really read that stuff to it, and also to think hard about why he went bad in the end and what we can learn from that. So yeah, there's the Hitchens book. Yeah, I mean it's 0 books. They're short books. I don't know if I'd quite say pamphlets, but they're certainly short books. Verso things can be longer. It is what it is. They do Zero does shorter books, but I mean whatever. People are more likely to get through those. So yeah, those are the 2 book projects. Obviously, there's Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, Critique of the Contemporary Left, which is coming out at the end of April. There's Jacobin. There's possibly again, the people at the Gravel Institute said they wanted to do some stuff with me. I'm not quite sure what that looks like just yet. Yeah, somebody in chat says get that new atheist demo to question the fact they're like measuring skulls now. Hitchens, to his credit, couldn't stand IQ obsessives and was very funny about them, even in the later period of his life where he did have some other bad positions. So let me just, okay. So yeah, working on all of that. Very, very early. Who knows, right? It's possible that I might get an article in The Guardian coming up. We'll see, right? Yeah, H.S. Ross, thank you for the super chats. Is really looking forward to your feasible socialism book. Keep up the amazing work. Really, really, really appreciate that. Oh man, yeah, McMindfulness, Who Moved My Cheese, says, love getting my copy of The Nation in the mail in the 90s, Hitchens and Coburn on the same editorial pages. Absolutely. Like I'm, just barely old enough to remember that. But yeah, I love both of those guys writing so much. No question about it. But in any case, I think I can feel myself getting less coherent. I'm going to wrap it there, play Rummikub with Jennifer, walk the dog, get ready to go to bed. So thank you, everybody, so much for showing up. We'll see. I'm gonna have to think about whether I've got another one of these in me as soon as tomorrow, which is what I was originally planning on. But if not, very, very soon. Left is best. Good night.